Welcome to episode 18 of CyberBytes, the podcast. I'm Oliver Legg, co-founder of Asperon Search, and excited to welcome Bryson Bort. Bryson is a two-time security founder and a co-founder of the non-profit ICS Security Village. His latest venture, Scythe, has a unique branding and marketing story behind it, and something we go into today. Welcome to the podcast, Bryson, the unicorn for today's episode. Welcome to the show, buddy. How are things?
Every day is a holiday, Oliver. How are you?
Yeah, all good. Every day is a holiday in the UK at the moment with a heat wave. So the same Florida weather.
Yeah, your heat wave is our like early spring.
It is. Yeah, they're different categories for sure. So I was going to start by talking about your branding, and your headwear today has made that even more appropriate. So for the listeners and the viewers, Bryson is the founder of a couple of different firms and a non-profit, all focused around a Grim Reaper and unicorn type branding. And having been at RSA and inundated with swag, he definitely had the best sticker, which has pride and place on my laptop. So yeah, why don't you talk people through the branding and the design first of all, because it's an interesting one.
Yeah. So first to preface, because for most of you meeting me are like, this guy's ridiculous. And for the folks who've known me for a long time, they are doubly amused that I have found myself here in my career. Former Army officer, did a stint in the intelligence community. So very serious guy doing a lot of very serious work. My nickname in the intelligence community was Grimm. And so 10 years ago, when I quit and founded my first company, which was a consultancy, I named it Grimm because that sounded cooler than Bryson. And I had no idea about branding or any of this stuff. And just total coincidence out of the gate, kind of had this idea for the logo, found a video game graphics designer on one of the gig platforms from Blizzard, and he created this right out of the gate. And immediately we learned that this was a good logo because, I mean, everybody remembers it. It wasn't the kind of thing you saw in a proposal and you were like, I'm not going to remember that name. And then the other funny part is it actually turned into a bit of a Rorschach test because the consultancy was a high-end offensive security firm, which meant that we weren't just picking anybody up off the street to do work with. And so it turns out the folks that found this comical or sophomoric weren't our customers anyway. The folks who found the humor in it were perfect. So it was a great Rorschach test. Every year for DEF CON, the largest annual hacking conference out in Las Vegas, we would do a t-shirt contest. And so we would come up with all these different ideas. And one year I came up with the idea of a Grim Reaper riding a unicorn, because I thought the juxtaposition was incredibly funny. Oliver, this was the design that proved if the cybersecurity thing doesn't work out, plan B is merch. Everybody wanted this design. It blew up. It was huge. And a year after that is when I spun Scythe, which was an R&D project that we'd been working on inside of Grimm. And I spun it out with VC investment. And as I was sitting there and I'm thinking, okay, this was really an iconic logo. How do we do that? Well, I can't do brand confusion, so it can't be like the people part of it. Like I can't use the Grimm. A scythe is just a piece of wood and metal, so it's boring. People are really into these unicorns. So I came up with that. It follows what I call the Disney villain philosophy. The kids think it's cute. The adults get the joke.
Love that.
And then, yes, then I started dressing up as the unicorn to lean into the bit.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, and just from a swag perspective, you've got these conferences like RSA where just I dread to think how many thousands of dollars are poured into merch, and most
that all goes in the trash.
Yeah, it all goes in the trash. And there's a couple of firms that just have really thought through, but often the simplest items, and they go the longest way. And as I say, like yours is on my laptop because my daughter loved it, and yep. I think the people that have the simplest but most useful or memorable merch, it does the best and often costs the least. So good job on the branding.
Yeah, well, so I'm gonna take that opportunity to highlight two things. One, on all the wastefulness that we see at these conferences. We like to encourage folks to be more charity based. And so consider donating that stuff, particularly like the backpacks. Those are great things to donate. And there's a lot of little things that would really help, like the local homeless in that conference's city. So recommend that. For
Mm.
us, how we did that, because we don't do that kind of swag to avoid it, but we link everything to charity. And so we have a swag store, swag.scythe.io, and all of the proceeds go to conservation of endangered rhinos, which ties back into our brand because rhinos are chubby unicorns. And so just in terms of basing everything back in charity, that's a big part of what we do. The second part about that is one of the best items that we ever did a few years ago is we made a coloring book. And so we're going to be bringing the coloring book back to Black Hat in Vegas in 2 months. So just heads up.
Awesome. Well, make sure you've got a load because I'll be filling a suitcase on the way back from. But no, that's great. And so I guess rewinding to the very start then, because we jump forward to the firm that you're currently building. Whereas your security journey started way back in the military. So can you just kind of take people back to how you got into security and then how you ended up being a two-time founder and a non-profit founder?
Uh, so I think the qualities that attract people to cybersecurity cross over with the quality of being an entrepreneur, and that's passion. You have to be intellectually curious. And my intellectual curiosity, I think, started where I think a lot of people do, which is as a kid, you get told no or something blocks you. And so you're like, I'm going to get around that. For me, it was video games. And so I wanted to break the rights management on video games to be able to play them. From there, then I wanted to modify the video game because it got boring. So I would figure out ways to go into the code directly to change the game. Of course, back then, that wasn't security or anything like that. That wasn't something that even was codified quite that way. But that's how I got into it. And it's the same skill set that, of course, applies to the modern world. Yeah, so from there, I mean, it was a career that just naturally flowed from doing that into coding and to making games to continuing to do all that stuff. So it was just natural progression of each job kind of opened up when I was ready for it.
Yeah, awesome. And with Scythe, because we've come across Scythe a few times in the professional work Aspiron does, because we did quite a lot of we do a lot of OT and IoT offensive security research projects. So you guys have a very good name in the Michigan and wider US. Am I right in saying that you handed over kind of being the CEO? And if so, what was that like? What was the decision process in saying, right, it's time to take that step away and be a founder, but not be the day-to-day running of the business?
Yeah. So full story there. Grimm was probably 25 folks in 2016, and Target, whom everybody knows Target. And I love the story of Target because they are one of the milestones in this industry. The first that I like to point out, I feel, is firewalls being commercially available and broadly used about 2000 plus or minus. And then Target in 2012 to 13 was the first time that business writ large was like, we're going to invest in this. It's more than just firewalls and AV. And that was a game changer. The next major milestone, I would say, is MITRE ATT&CK, because it was the first way to simplify a language for describing attack logic. It is horribly abused. Almost anywhere you see MITRE ATT&CK, it's being used incorrectly. But that really speaks to the profound simplicity of it. That's why that leads to that. So as Target comes to me in 2016, and they had the problem of building a world-class security organization that now what, right? Whether you spend a lot of money on this stuff or a little money on this stuff, it's just a matter of time when you're going to get breached. And being able to find the edge cases is a increasingly challenging problem. And so they asked me to build a one-off tool. I was shocked there was nothing on the market that could already do that. And I went back to them and said, well, instead of building you a tool, I want to build you a platform that allows you to scale your testing on your own terms, whether that's risk, scope, technical ability, like everything just builds on itself and automates a lot of that for you. And that was the birth of the Scythe platform, which we called Project Crossbow, so play off the target. And as soon as I realized that that was the case, that's where I was like, this is what I want to do next. I had not been looking to do anything else. I was very happy building a great business at Grimm, but this was such a cool idea to get to take a product to market. That's what I wanted to do. So I spent a year documenting and building out all of the strategic structure and pieces for me to move on. I recruited a CEO, brought them on as a principal initially so that they got time in the company and everybody to get to learn them, build the respect, and then handed it over. And I was not one of those founders who was like still meddling, still coming in, putting stuff in the soup. I was like, this is my R&D project. You run the company. Anybody comes to me, I'm going to point them to you. And I did. Yeah, that was what ultimately led to me getting VC investment, because the advantage with Grimm is we could fund the R&D, but I lacked the commercialization experience. I had never taken a software product to market. There's a whole lot of stuff that goes into that has nothing to do with building software. And so that's where I decided to bring in VCs. And it was Ron Gula, who co-founded Tenable, who anchored me with Dmitry Alperovich from CrowdStrike. That was my board when we launched at the end of 2018.
So a serious crack team to launch a cybersecurity company with.
Two of about the best coaches you could hope for.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was that process like seeking investment? Were you set from very early on these are my two guys, or were you interviewing and being interviewed by tens of VCs?
Yeah. So the same cluelessness that led me to need to start this path was the same cluelessness that I embarked upon the path. It really, it's very consistent. I didn't know what I was doing. I would summarize it as arduous, painful, and again, I was clueless. I probably met with about 80 different potential investors. I didn't know what I was doing. I was in a pitch meeting to a VC's board within a month of me starting, which I was just like, oh, okay. I didn't even know what that was, right? I flew up to the city to meet with these folks. So I'm kind of like bumbling through it. And I didn't realize how big a deal it was to even get to that. And it seemed so easy right off the bat. And then, of course, I didn't see another one of those for like a year. I didn't want to get the dog walking on the floor into this. She's laying back down. Supervisor's back in her position. I also got stabbed in the back by one VC, really hardcore. That was also a learning experience. And it was Ron at a conference in New York City. I remember this was May of 2018. He's like, you're having breakfast with me. Like, we're going to sit down and talk. And he was like, I love what you're saying. I love the dual use of this, which means, this has government and private industry application. I like your background. And to his credit, he's like, I want to put your tool in my lab. And Ron put our platform through the paces. He was every day texting with like, hey, what about this? What about that? Or da-da-da. Or, hey, look at this really cool thing I did. And then it was a few weeks later, we had the verbal for a term sheet.
Yeah, awesome.
And then once you get the anchor, everything goes a lot faster.
Yeah, of course. And there might be things that you can't say, but what can you share about the experience of getting stabbed in the back, so that other raising founders can try and avoid being in the same situation?
I mean, the simplest answer is I could just give you the guy's name, which I won't do, although I really want to, because just don't work with him. He's a terrible human being with no integrity. That's I think what I would summarize it as is you can't beat integrity. This is something that is inculcated us in the military. At the end of the day, I have to be back to back with people in a foxhole looking my range of fire, and you have to trust that the other person does what they're saying that they're going to do and can do what they say they're going to do, right? It's that you're not going to lie to me and you're competent enough to execute it. And I would suggest look at everybody very harshly through that lens, through that process, because getting in with an investor it's like getting married. I mean, you are contractually into the same situation, and you can't just annul that. You can't just, I mean, a divorce is expensive and painful. You don't want to do that, right? You want to be working together to focus on building and bringing this idea to market. And so I would suggest, again, look very harshly at everybody through that lens of, can I even trust them? Because it's so hard as a young entrepreneur, because you're just desperate for any attention. You're desperate for anybody to even think about giving you money. Like, all of these things seem so magical and impossible that you're willing to compromise because you feel that's the only way. Don't. Stick to the principles of integrity. If you have any question, move on. And that's probably the hardest thing to ever do as an entrepreneur, is when somebody says they want to give you a lot of money and you say, no, I don't want your money. But you'll be so much happier in the long term.
Yeah. Well, and even harder to do if you've spoken to 50 VCs, no one's given you an offer, and that's your first one. So yeah, I can see why people fall down that trap.
Yep.
So Scythe being a service company, and then
Scythe is a platform.
Grimm
software
being
platform. Grimm is services. Yeah. Grimm people, Scythe tool. That was, see?
What's the difference in terms of running it? Because I can imagine sales cycle is significantly different. And then pricing and contract length. So what did you learn in the difference between running a product versus a services firm?
Sure. So the first part that is critical is recognizing you're dealing with a different economic model. Most folks just think of money as making money, but there's models to making money, and there's fundamentally two different models. Services, an hour of time is worth an hour of pay. Whether you get paid $1, whether you get paid $100,000, it is still tied to a human amount of resource, which is why the multiples and valuations are tied more explicitly to that, and lower, because it only scales as you hire people. The other part about a services business is you are the fun and not fun part of it at the same time is you don't have like a catalog item. It's not like one assessment, please, right? Each one requires custom engagement, understanding, relationship management, and all of those pieces. So it's kind of, like I said, fun because you're constantly like trying to learn and like, well, this is what you need. And that means this, this, and this, and this thing we haven't thought of. And boom, that's your package, right? And then that's fun, but it's also exhausting because you're constantly right on this kinetic like frequency of hunting and bringing it in, and each one is a little different, which takes extra work. In a product company, your unit of measure is the product, right? My economics are, what is somebody willing to pay for whatever that is? That's it, right? That could be, again, I could pay $1 a license. I could pay $100,000 a license every year. The economic model scales differently because it's the software that goes with it and whatever the market is willing to pay for that. The part that simplifies really quickly is you sell a product. The product pretty much does what you say it does, and that's it. You don't customize this stuff because there's nothing to customize. Here's the tool. You might have a feature request that we might include on a future roadmap, but I'm not custom packaging to you. I think growing a consultancy, a services organization is a lot easier because, again, the economic model is person by person. And so your growth is very organic. You grow and then you sort of tip over person by person as opportunities come and grow. Whereas a product company, typically you are cash invested. And so you are in a growth model. You are in these plateaus of achieve a certain level, hire a bunch of people, achieve a certain level, hire a bunch of people. And that's the step function through the raises that you go through. And I don't think people really appreciate how hard that part is. I cannot tell you how many technical founders I've had the conversation with in the last 2 years where I'm like, the hardest part is not the tech, it's the people. And as you're going through these step functions, I think the first initial step function is the hardest because going from Scrappy seed to A round, that difference in size is the greatest difference you'll ever have, right? A round, you'll have a large enough base. And yeah, even if you grow that much, it's still off of a larger base for the B round. So the A round, I think, is where you really see these three phases the most. The first is the honeymoon. Holy cow, I'm getting a ton of money to be able to invest in the ideas. As a seed company, you're scrappy, right? You're looking for the 25th hour in a day. There is no more money or people to do something. You only got what you got. A round, you now have the ability to do that. So that's that initial honeymoon of, yay, I got there, quickly followed by what I would say is the wilderness because of the manifold people problem at multiple levels. Who from the seed team is going to grow into the next level or stay for as we scale? And I need to hire a bunch of individual contributors, probably in functions that didn't even exist before. And I'm now going to need to build some level of middle management because I have so many individual contributors. And at the same time, I'm scaling my leadership team. And I'm trying to do all of that at the same time, considering nobody hires 100%. So you're hiring wrong and you are constantly doing that. So I call that the wilderness. That's whatever period of time that is. I would say 12 to 24 months. And then you get into what I call the execution phase. You've gone through all the grist of building an organization that is led and executed by the right people. And now you can actually move forward on the vision.
Yeah, yeah, no, interesting way of putting it. And so, what stage would you say you're in now?
We're in execution.
Yeah, so you've made it past.
I went through the wilderness. The end of 22 was the end of my wilderness.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. No, fantastic. And I mean that's a good kind of roundup of Scythe as well. And then there's the on the side where you must be finding a 25th hour is the little thing about also running a non-profit. So talk us through that and how on earth you find the time.
Yeah, so the ICS Village, which is a 501c3 that I co-founded with Tom Van Norman, is probably the example of I don't like my own free time, I guess, because that's what I do in my free time. Yeah, so we are education, training, and advocacy for critical infrastructure security. ICS is industrial control system. So for those of you who are not familiar with the operational technology side of the house, it's any computer that's at least 20 years old. That's what we deal with. That is what the ICS Village is about. We are mainstays at RSA and DEF CON. We have our own conference called Hack the Capitol that takes place in Washington, D.C. every year. The seventh one is targeted for March of next year. It's a multi-day conference with members of Congress, think tanks, industry, government. I mean, it is probably the premier critical infrastructure conference on policy. And then we support other security conferences throughout the year, bringing different exhibits at different levels and capture the flags.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Yeah, I last year was my first year at DEF CON, and yeah, seeing your I think it was a model wind turbine, and I think a renewable power plant that was set up in one of the conference rooms at CIS. So yeah, it was an impressive thing to see.
Yeah, we have a lot of those kinds of things. The real one that's I think the most popular that we debuted last year was the escape room. The problem was that it was so popular, it effectively sold out before we even started the conference. So we've cooperated to expand the scale and what we can do. So we'll be having two of them. So for those of you who really wanted to do the escape room last year, we heard you. We're bringing back more, and it's worth checking out because it is the like hands-on kinesthetic CTF, but it's not so complicated that a beginner can't learn from doing it. So don't be intimidated when you come to our village.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. And for people that do want to get into industrial security, what routes are there for them? Because if you want to do web app, then you've got Hack the Box and all sorts of online training platforms. Where is that what ICS Village offers, or how can someone get into industrial security?
Yeah, so the industrial stuff is harder because it's more difficult to virtualize correctly. And then when I'm dealing with physical equipment, it's not meant for concurrency. So I can only have one person on the thing at a time versus I can just build up an entire VM architecture of networking and all of this stuff. And you can have multiple people doing multiple things in IT. So those limitations have been a real struggle for a lot of the training options. That is what the village offers in person at the different events that we do. I'm not really sure where to point folks for training otherwise because I've never really seen it. I've seen lots of talks. But like actually learning, not as often, not really an option because mostly it needs to be in person.
Yeah, unless you've got a model power plant in your home office, which I'm sure makes.
Yeah, I mean, the recommendation for that I point for folks to get started is go on eBay, buy a cheap PLC, a programmable logic controller, and just start playing, and kind of grow from there.
Off you go. Yeah, no, awesome. And with Scythe, what is next for Scythe for people wanting to see where you can take the business? What can you tell people to look out for?
Sure. So I think the interesting thing about us is while we have been lumped into the breach and attack simulation space, we never really fit that, not because the name doesn't seem to match what we do, but because the other companies that are in it we don't do the same thing. And so we've been this outlier. And the reason for that is, one, I guess I'm lucky to be lumped anywhere because what I'm about to say, which is what we've built is effectively for a market that does not exist. I mean, if you look at what we do, we are at core what would be termed red team. And I mean that from a tool perspective, because at the end of the day, a red team's purpose is driving threat behavior for understanding and improvement. And that's what the tool does, is it can recreate any threat behavior safely from scratch, including the logic of that, which is one of the parts that's more red teamy than breach and attack simulation, which doesn't do logic. It just does. Remember when I said MITRE ATT&CK is being abused? Breach and attack simulation has failed you on MITRE ATT&CK. It has turned it into a bingo card, and it's completely malpractice. I'm that vehement now, having seen a number of customers spend years investing in these tools to literally have nothing. And they think they've got something, which is the malpractice part. Sorry, that part I get really upset about because I'm now seeing it more and more. So great. You talk a big game there from your ivory tower of what you just told me is you're really not making a lot of money because there's not a lot of market there, which is why we leaned so hard into purple teaming, because it was a way to bridge that gap. But still, that's not really like a whole market either. So our whole roadmap now is accessibility. I think our tech is innovative and the most valuable and interesting in the space. It's just never been accessible. It was the kind of thing that only like a few people here and a few companies were able to really understand and work with. And that doesn't need to be that way. And so our whole focus is integration and automation to make this complicated idea available to everybody in an enterprise. I mean, if you think about it, everybody in an enterprise has a security use case requirement. Why can't a sysadmin check a configuration before they push it? Why can't a network engineer validate a configuration before they push? Well, because typically that meant a request that led to a person over here to be able to do those kinds of things. And there's no way that's going to happen because there's so few of them and so much demand. Well, a tool can solve that if it's accessible. And so our goal is to any of these folks along the line, beyond just folks in blue, basically whatever their tool of choice is, so their workflow, having that little unicorn in the corner that they can press the unicorn and it automatically goes and safely does the stuff and gives them the data back where they need it. So that's our roadmap of what we're doing.
Yeah, awesome. No, sounds exciting, and especially in the times we're in, it's good to see companies still flourishing with some of the doom and gloom that often gets posted out there. It's not all to be believed. So for anyone wanting to follow you, you've got a pretty entertaining Twitter feed and some pretty solid dishes out there. So from a cooking perspective, so if Scythe doesn't work out, you can always go on American MasterChef and see how that goes.
I do have a cooking show that I launched at the beginning of the pandemic called Unicorn Chef. It's been a little sporadic with travel, and I've also been scaling the show. So there are now 5 of us, and the whole approach to the show is pick a charity, pick a recipe, and then the host with a guest chef cooks it together, highlighting a charity. So that's Unicorn Chef. But yes, thank you. I'm glad that plan B is merch and plan C, I guess, is a restaurant.
Well, hopefully you won't need them. But what's your Twitter? I'll put it in the show notes in the same
at Bryson Bort.
Awesome, good stuff. Well, thanks for coming on, Bryson. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you, Oliver.